Hi, everybody. Hope you're well. Thank you for joining me. So, um, big news today from Apple and Apple's Irish regime, and I want to talk about it. Give me an old sound check there in the chat if you can, and I'll get stuck into it. I want to give a brief explanation of what's happened, and boy, I'm not, I don't know like deep economic jargon, all this kind of stuff. I kind of have common sense and I can read English and I base it off of that. The whole point of a lot of this stuff is that it's needlessly complicated anyway, this kind of jargon. So I'll just be speaking common sense tonight, I hope. So some time ago, the European Commission found that Apple owed the Irish state 13 billion in back tax, 14 with interest, 14 billion. I think I said billion both times there. And just today, of course, once that was announced, I mean, it's such a ridiculous thing. Apple and Ireland both were appealing it for reasons I'll get into. Together, Apple were appealing it that they didn't want to pay the tax, and Ireland didn't want to take the tax for reasons I'll get into. My eye constantly on the chat here, like obviously, like I'm getting reports on the sound coming and going. So I don't know. I'll do my best here, but I mean, there's so much to unpack, as they say, with this lot. The obvious thing is like the dichotomy. The main thing that stands out to me with this happening today, in that Apple and Ireland Inc. were successful in appealing it, so that 14 billion will not be paid. Right? So they've gotten their way, Apple and the Irish state, and it just strikes people as strange, obviously, because I'll get into the dichotomy, but the first thing that strikes people as odd is internationally and domestically is like, why wouldn't you want 14 billion? Right? 14 billion could buy you loads of houses, loads of jellies, loads of hospitals, loads of whatever you want, right? It's just it's a lot of money. I can see Liam Kelly, if you can see there in the chat, has just hit the nail on the head. Has stolen my thunder there, because you've made my point. There's a dichotomy here, and it's like between the neoliberals, which is a well-funded kind of lobby in Ireland, who, I mean, it's the entire state, every politician, everyone, all these like celebrated economists and journalists will pretty much sell this view as well, which is that, and this goes deep into the Irish psyche, of course, modern psyche, which is that like we need it or else we kill it and we die. And to some extent, like our economy as it is, our society and our kind of, I don't know, our state as it is would kind of like die, basically, because yes, as things are, we do depend on that, and it's kind of true to an extent, but it's sold and hawked as a kind of a religion by the people that sell it. I think they overemphasize it, they emphasize it or they sell it in such a way as that there is no other alternative. It is a kind of a single truth that must be pursued, and there's no discourse, there's no, I don't know, there's just no thinking, there's no imagination beyond it, things as they are and have been for 40 years since we began this FDI policy. There's that side, and then there is the Paul Murphys, the Trotskyists, these kind of people, and they will say, they come out with the easiest take in the whole world, and they go, we should take it. We should take it because we could, rebuild or whatever after COVID-19, or we could get loads of houses and estates and, social housing and stuff like that, which is very nice to say. Sounds cool. And of course, the neoliberals will say, well, yes, Paul, but of course, that's not the long-term view. The long-term view is that 14 billion is inconsequential compared to what we would lose and what we stand to gain if we don't take the money. Blah, blah, blah. I think I'm telling you what you know here. I think you know everything I probably have to say, but you definitely know that. And that's the kind of dichotomy. And honestly, the neoliberals are what they are. I'll probably spend most of my time here talking about them. But Paul Murphy almost annoys me more. Paul Murphy and like his crew, that whole gang, because it's just such a grug take, and it's also, and like it's wrong as well, because of course, it's the entire economic model needs to be overhauled and our dependency on it. And we are basically a colony, and that's it. That's end of story. To talk about the 14 billion alone, or to say, well, maybe we should tax them a little bit more, or, you know, we should get a bigger slice of this capitalist pie. This, like, it's not even capitalism in the traditional sense of, like, people think about private business and enterprise. This is capitalism on, like, mega steroids. This is global, like the Matrix level capitalism, like algorithm style RAND capitalism, global machine. This is not like private enterprise. This is super capitalism, and it's not even that, because it's also, you know, it's like state support ultimately, and that was the argument against Apple in the first place, is that they were basically done a state favor by all these, like, you know, loop-de-loop kind of tax arrangements. We're basically a tax haven. People are arguing that, yeah, that's effectively state aid. That's effectively socialism for them, effectively, you know, in their global operations. At the, you know, aren't the Irish state very nice to do it? So it's almost like capitalism on steroids, but even worse and different, and not even capitalism, because it's socialism for mega corporations. And you know, that dichotomy is just bullshit. And it's why the Paul Murphys annoy me more, because they exist to kind of be like, what the regime sets out is that they turn up the volume on the neoliberal establishment, who say that, like, our lives depend on Apple and stuff. Like, as in, I agree that our economy would suffer and there'd be big changes. It'd be revolutionary. But I disagree with this whole thing that we would be like, you know, it becomes Angela's ashes if we in any way adjust our policy towards these multinationals. In any way, if we in any way fundamentally tweak it or change it or attenuate it or reduce, I don't know what attenuate means, but, you know, if we reduce it any bit, we like, it's like light switch. We automatically become Angela's ashes and the famine. And it's just like, guys, that's such bullshit. But that's their point of view, or it's not their point of view, it's what they're paid to say. That crowd are given 75% volume, as in they're given 75% of like the speech time or the influence credit. They're given 75% of it. And then they give a portioned 25% to Paul Murphy to give this grug Trotskyist kind of take. And he's just another member of the Punch and Judy to say, oh, well, that they say that, and what I say is that we should take it and we should spend it on stuff and whatever. And it's very simplistic, and ultimately it's designed so that the neolib side kind of wins out, because their rhetoric is given more time, more energy, and ultimately they're the ones in power anyway, right? So it is what it is. But they're important to, or they're mindful to have, of course, the Paul, and this applies on every issue with these like PPPs and stuff. They're there for that reason, to be this kind of, it sounds cringe, but like false opposition, to kind of be there as this like grug-brained, like 15 IQ response to, you know, things that are demonstrably kind of wrong, or definitely, you know, strange and wrong, basically, to be the kind of, to be the false opposition really to that, you know, no one ever is going to listen to anyway, and whatever. It's like, Paul Murphy's talking about this 14 billion. We could build a playground with that. We could do this and that. It's like, let me give you some fact, okay? Last year, an economist, he teaches economics. I think he's an accountant, but he teaches in the Trinity Business School. His name is Cormac Lucy, and he was giving a speech just about the general economic situation of Ireland. And he said that, according to CSO, his own reading of it or whatever, that since 2004, 60% of all jobs, new jobs that had been created in Ireland, went to foreigners, went to non-nationals, whatever you want to call them. That's incredible, right? And of course, what you're always being told is that, you know, I know some of the multinational stuff is bad. I know we can't get the 14 billion. I know they're destroying our country, basically, our culture, our environment. It takes 2 hours to get to work in the morning. You work your bollocks off, and yet you can barely rent like a 1-bedroom flat. You can't even consider having kids, etc. Right? That's all because, you know, you're in this kind of economy that's running really hot, you know, and there's a lot going on and more population. That's like the downside of the multinationals. But then they go, yeah, well, I know they'll kind of concede to you that that's bad. They'll go, yeah, that's bad in ways, but I mean, all these jobs you're getting, depend on that. So you have to take the rough with the smooth, don't you? And it's like, okay, so you're telling me the smooth in this situation is new job creation, of which 40% we get, we being Irish people. And you don't mention that 6 out of 10 of those jobs goes to foreigners. So what's the point? Instead of announcing, let's say so-and-so on the TV announces that in the last 20 years, I'm pulling this figure out of a hat here, but like in the last 20 years, 1 million jobs were created. And that's why it's all worth it. And you go, well, that's just not true. You have to say in the last 20 years, based on like 1 million, 400,000 jobs were created. That's what was really created. And which jobs were they anyway? And, the whole view is wrong on this. That's one thing, is the jobs, right? It's an astounding fact. It's linked below on BitChute on Orla Red. Cormac Lucy speaking about this. Here's something else, is that Ireland we know about all these multinationals, and there's so many different types, and I told you I don't know all the technicalities of it and the jargon, but of course it's designed that way. And I'm not educated in the jargon of economics or whatever, but still. Aidan Regan, who is educated on this stuff, I think he teaches in UCD or DCU or one of these, and he's a kind of a noted economist type of guy, but he's actually kind of on the ball on a lot of stuff. And he cited a statistic there in an article he wrote for the Washington Post, that in Ireland's shadow banking economy, right, which is basically these kind of legal instruments that are like, this is a legal instrument. It's kind of like a country. It's kind of like a person. It exists and it doesn't exist. And it's like surrounded in jargon. Basically, it's unknown and it's secret and it's whatever. And it's basically funneling money around, tax haven style, double Irish, all that stuff. Well, it's a version of that. And it's shadow banking, which is separate to some of the other tax dodging, and it's separate to the Googles and all of that even. And that alone, this shadow banking, and it's linked below, is estimated there is 2.5 trillion euros. I think it's euros, dollars, whatever. 2.5 trillion swimming around Ireland or running through Ireland. And that's in shadow banking alone. Now I'm going to take a liberty here and say that's one specific bit. There's other bits, again, it's needlessly made complicated and arcane and hard to follow and all of this. But we're going to assume that outside of shadow banking and some other form of vehicle, as they call it, special vehicles and all this kind of stuff, there's probably another trillion here, another trillion there, another trillion somewhere else type of thing, right? If that's 2.5 trillion in shadow banking, we're going to say it's 4 or 5 trillion. I don't know. As someone says trillion ? Yes, I mean trillion. So that 2.5 shadow banking trillion is 2,500 billion. And a billion is 1,000 million. I mean, this is insane, right? The intellectual property, which is like a lot of tech stuff. So tech kind of, there's an article on it here. I linked it below. It's another Aidan Regan one. It's a Tale of Two Economies. And it's just about IPP. How what's his name? Philip Lane, the ex-central bank governor, who's now with the European Central Bank. Aidan Regan is talking about how he made a speech noting that this stuff to do with IPP in Ireland being kind of ran through Ireland and inflating our economy on paper is so great and so massive that not only does it like falsely inflate Ireland's economy to distort our ability to even read the Irish economy to see what's actually going on. Not only that, but it's so big that it actually distorts the ability to measure the entire Eurozone's economy, which is incredible. And it the author here, or the guy who wrote Economist, goes through it. So you can go through the understands it and the jargon and all of that, but that's effectively the point. It's so big it distorts the Eurozone. We have 2.5 trillion in shadow banking, and probably here, there, everywhere in different ways. That's my layman's kind of assumption on it. And all of this is occurring, and the thing we're told is that, well, the upshot is jobs. The upshot is jobs, but you only get 40% of them. 40% we're told. And by the way, do you think as time goes by, that's not getting like smaller? For all we know, that was last year. For all we know, it's 36% now. I don't know, but even 40 is incredible. you know, it's sold to you on the basis it's implied that 100% of those jobs are Irish people. Now we all know that's not true, but in just the kind of language they use, that's what they're trying to imply. That's the goodies you get in return, and they don't say, well, technically, I suppose it depends on what we call you. It's insane. Here's an analogy, and I know you understand this already, but let's say you live in a village, right? And there's a big, smoky, dirty factory wants to move in, and it's going to be, bad and stuff like that. Maybe bad for the river. They're going to influence the culture. They're going to dominate the town. They're going to have a say over the community leadership and stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's got all these bad things that you're like, that is not good. But they go, yeah, well, you know what I mean? You guys, economics wise, you're still trying to figure it out. So if we come here, we create 500 jobs. And in a town of, only a small enough amount of people, that 500 jobs is a job for a lot of you guys. Or 100 jobs. Let's call it 100 jobs. That 100 jobs will be really good jobs and whatever. And then they bring it in and it turns out you have 40 jobs. And you're kind of like, well, had we not let you in and just run around our own economy, we'd be able to get those 40 jobs anyway. We have to talk about this as it is. And, the other thing as well is that it's endless lies by omission. They'll say, well, of course, Google, which is the big fancy job creator in Dublin, and these are great jobs or whatever. We know that it's, 80%, 90%? Look it up. Sorry, I don't have all this one to hand. I just thought of it. It has 80 or 90% of jobs in Google in Dublin are like foreigners brought in. And they go, well, that's kind of high tier jobs, right? But of course, all those people need coffee and they need to get a taxi, etc. So, they go, okay, you might be right there, but there's supplementary jobs that need to support the original Google job. So that's for you, I suppose. And you go, well, no, because an equal amount of taxi drivers are foreign and probably an equal amount of baristas are foreign as well, or some high proportion. So it's like you're creating extra jobs and bringing people in to do them. That's a landing at an airport zone that you were just using. When you talk about us, you do not recognize an us, right? So it's nonsense, and that's why whenever Paul Murphy and these guys tried to get on their soapbox about we should take the 14 billion. It's like, talk about us only getting 40% of these jobs, which are meant to be the consolation prize. Talk about these trillions in shadow banking and what influence that has in our society. And here's another thing, by the way. The other COPE. So they admit there's a bad element to start with, environmentally, etc. They compete with Irish business and stuff like that. And this goes for the whole team, that national thing, top to bottom, the trivial stuff and the bigger stuff. They'll admit that there's bad elements, there's negatives potentially. Sometimes they're undeniable negatives. So they'll go, okay, well, all those negatives can be explained away by the jobs. And then you go, well, less than half of those jobs go to us anyway, so we might as well just not do it and make some jobs among ourselves, shouldn't we? If we're only having 40% anyway, the maths probably leave us in a position where we might as well kind of leave a lot of it off anyway and just have our own internal economy or a more indigenous economy. And they go, okay, I didn't know you knew that fact, but fair enough. No, they go, even though the corporations have tax deals and stuff, the fact that they're so big in scale, they still do create quite a bit of revenue, or quite a bit of coin for the exchequer, basically. And it's like, okay, so they create wealth for the exchequer, for the budget, basically, right? And they can argue that to some extent they do make up a lot of the tax income that's made in Ireland in certain ways, even though they dodge. And you go, that's true, I'll acknowledge that. But what is that for? That is for, I don't know, things that states do. Social housing, roads, hospitals, schools, right? And ultimately, anyone in Ireland knows this. is that any increase in our tax net is subsequent spending. So they're like, well, we're building this new hospital and we wouldn't be able to do that without the multinationals. It's like, just to put it as simply as possible, which is, the only way I know how, but I think it's true, is that, okay, so the so-called wealth brought in by this gave us 3 hospitals worth of wealth. Let's say we were able to, in return, we got money enough for 3 hospitals. We built 3 hospitals. Great. But as part of that package, we had to take in 10 hospitals worth of new people. So by that logic, we're obviously down 7 hospitals in a certain way of thinking about it. And if someone says that's very simplistic, that's not like an equation, and it's not based on actual straight up and you could do these equations if you wanted to, or do the kind of maths on it, but like, even without doing that, everybody knows that anyway, right? Hospitals are more crowded, like I said, and they do the same thing. They'll argue the same illogical way of looking at it. When it comes to immigration, well, immigration keeps our hospitals afloat with all the staff. Otherwise, our hospitals would collapse. And it's like, well, why would our hospitals collapse? Obviously, because our population is increasing rapidly every year, even though our birth rates are lowering and net Irish people emigrate every year. Well, obviously, any bit of demand that exists in hospitals creating pressure, by definition, must be immigrant fueled in terms of increased population. So it's the same round, circular, wrong argument they're trying to give you. They're trying to spin you. And it's the same with the economic thing. Well, multinationals, okay, the jobs thing is a bit weak. They do have bad aspects, but we'll fall back lastly on the money we take in from them in tax. But of course, that only gets, first off, a lot of that gets squirreled away into the government bureaucracy anyway, just an ever-growing state that basically depends on that for itself. And then eventually some of it leaks out to public goods and public works. But those public works are not going to be enough anyway. Again, we built, this kind of is a John Waters-esque point here, but we built 6 new motorways and 7 new smaller roads or whatever, right? We built X, Y, and Z roads. I'm Mr. Politician. Okay, well, you built all those roads over the course of 20 years, but I could get from here to there in 20 minutes before, and now it takes me 2 hours. So, why does it take me 2 hours? Obviously, because there's a lot more people. You could say more cars as well, but ultimately it's a lot more people. Especially into the bigger cities and stuff, immigration wise. So at the end of the day, these things, these trinkets you're giving me as the upshot are not actually an upshot. If you actually unpack that, that's actually another downside. So you're giving me downside to satiate the downside. And when that fails, you give me another supposed upside, but that's actually a downside as well. Like what people need to do is stop looking at GDP and start looking at their lives, And that raises another question, of course, because a certain segment of the population will do okay out of this. And that's designed that way. But, I suppose the civil service are slightly looked after, but even people living in the civil service or working in the civil service in cities, they still can't afford the rent and the mortgage and stuff. It's like, obviously, because you bring all these immigrants in, you heat up the economy, we supposedly get some more tax and all that, but housing is a finite thing. Land is a finite thing. Obviously, it's a human thing. There's only so many houses can go up. There are objections. There is only so many. And then of course, I'm harping on old points here, but then they tell you, well, we need immigration, obviously, because we need labor for these houses. And you're going, this is just one big, horrendous merry-go-round. And all their arguments end up as a merry-go-round at the end. Whether they're talking about diversity and immigration, and these things are inextricably linked, or whether they're talking about the simple economic maths of it, the all this kind of stuff. They will all come circular or go around in circles with this argument. It's just I don't know. How do I phrase it? It's like God, I'm really tongue tied here. It exists for itself to catch up with itself all the time, and we are just on the margins looking at it. It's a colonial empire. I don't think anyone can argue. Well, people can argue. Many people are paid to, but it's obvious that Ireland, and it's not just Ireland. I'm not like petty on this one. It's a lot of Western countries, including the big ones, including the United States, the people of the United States, basically the entire West, and a lot of the rest of the world. I think China is one of the only countries that kind of stands out as like distinctly different from all the rest, but definitely in the West, most acutely, as a colonial regime. And it's like the British East India Company or something like that, or the British Empire itself, except far worse. And what's more insidious about it is that it isn't even the kind of supremacist Brits going around the place imposing themselves and fleecing the world and all this kind of stuff via their empire, their mercantile empire. It's actually worse because it doesn't even have this proud, like, kind of a dominating culture that they put all over the world, because it's not even British, let's say, or French or Dutch or something. It's rainbow style. It's everybody and it's nobody. It's every culture and it's no culture, but it exists as a kind of I don't know, it's one of these kind of Elysium-y type thing, pretty cringe film. It just exists on top of every country, and it is a colony. I mean, it has a flag. It has a rainbow flag. I'm sorry to say, it's not even particularly gay. That flag is kind of transcended. That's why people use the word global homo, effectively. But it's a colony, and we're under it. And one of the things I was thinking about is that I'm an architecture person who's to me now who like denies it. And in a way, it's like maybe no one does. Maybe they don't, I suppose, unless you're paid to. But like, I know you guys don't have any. I don't need to argue with you. But it's like, how could anyone argue that there's 2.5 trillion, which is unreal, in shadow banking running through Ireland that basically no one really knows about or understands or whatever, but it's still 2.5 trillion, and it's someone's 2.5 trillion running around Ireland. How can anyone entertain the fact that real fact, and the idea that Irish people have any say or role in this landmass that we call Ireland? It's the two things are mutually exclusive. There's no way, unless you say that like the Irish people's destiny and well-being and that are like harmoniously compatible with this international tax haven kind of zone, like Zone Western Asia company. Like you would have to argue that those two things don't rub up against each other. Like they both can exist independently of each other. But it's like, well, no, because this big, massive multinational empire zone we have on this country, on this airport landing strip of a place, well, it seems to have a will of its own, right? It wants those 60% of the workers, the new jobs being foreigners, didn't happen by itself. They gave those jobs. They wanted those jobs. If anyone's old enough to remember the early 2000s, I just about am. Well, I am, yeah, easily. The immigration thing happened seemingly on its own by magic, right? It's like, well, reality, no, it didn't, obviously, right? All of these various different social agendas that came in, they can all easily be tied back to the logic of multinational capital. Even if you think, whatever it might be. I mean, honestly, like there's going to be inevitably people in the chat. A lot of you will be pro-life, right? But let's say let's say there's someone pro-choice or whatever, pro-abortion, and whatever people use their terms. I'm just going to speak I'm going to speak above partisan take on that, right? For now, but just look at abortion. Women in the workplace, doubling the population of labor, which obviously lowers wages and gives a lot more bargaining power to capital and to companies. That's one thing. But women come with a difficulty that they tend to get pregnant sometimes. And despite all of the companies being like, oh, we support mat leave and we support women and all this kind of stuff, this kind of frills they put on it. Oh, we're not patriarchal, that we'd discriminate against women because they might get pregnant. Well, they've done that. They've said, yeah, no women in. If you get pregnant, we'll kind of take care of it, and we definitely at no point will you be denied the job because you might miss a couple of years, and obviously that's not good for the bottom line. Well, if they're stuck in that position, they can't argue against that. Well, they might just encourage the old bit of a, we're in a country here where abortion isn't regularized. We need our office workers with that option right there in front of them, encouraged, promoted, exalted. It's for business. And the reason I'm addressing someone who might be pro-choice here is that, like, even if you're like diehard committed pro-choice and you think morally that, like, in terms of a moral argument that a woman has a right to her body and blah blah blah, fine, but you can't, like, as in I'll accept that you think abortion is right and corporations actively wanted it and pushed for it, and I played a big role in initiating that culture and breaking down, the various Catholic norms and stuff like that. You can agree that what I'm saying is true and that abortion is all well and good and is a great thing. But don't tell me that the former isn't true, though. They did want it. And it goes for many other social agendas that have gone through Ireland. It's just obvious. I could see someone in the chat saying abortion is never fine and all that. I hope you understand the nuance, what I'm getting at there, just rhetorically, right? Just to look at it, the point I'm actually trying to make. But how anyone can argue that these trillions don't go through our country, or how anyone can argue that these trillions go through our country and we have any say, that we effectively don't live under a complete totalitarian thing that has nothing to do with us, and has actually not only no regard for us, but active disregard for us. I was thinking of an analogy there that because people can't think about it these days. People are too wrapped up in basically the propaganda. So you have to use kind of like almost like Hollywood analogies to set the stage. And here's one, is when the neoliberal shills will tell you, oh, well, it's good for the economy and we couldn't live without it and all that kind of stuff. Think about a Amazonian tribe. They live life in the woods somewhere. And this is just an analogy. It's not like for like, obviously. They live in the rainforest somewhere and they have a strange kind of, to us, indigenous culture and totally like almost hunter-gatherer and dances and this and that. The whole way they live is completely different. And there's a sort of admiration for them in their way. You kind of go, I don't know if it'd be for me, but they live happily in their kind of own way, don't they? And then global corporation rolls in and wants wood or wants oil, and there's a big gas deposit underneath or whatever, and they decide with the Brazilian state or whatever that, well, it's lots of money here, we're just gonna have to roll in and take this. Well, what will be said? They're not going to go in and just openly shoot all the natives, because let's face it, the easiest thing they could do if you took like public opinion out of the situation entirely would be to just kind of shoot everyone there, right? And just get rid of them. Same way if there were weeds, you would just kind of burn them down. You just clear off the rubbish to kind of get what you actually need, which is just the area, the resource. But they can't kind of go that far or whatever, and it's just impractical. It's not worth it. So what they do is they say, well, we are going to roll in, and there's going to be Saudi like oil people. There's going to be a Dutch administrator, advisor, kind of contractors. It's going to be American, whatever. There's going to be all sorts of multinational people running through here, through our little corporation / country. And what do we do with these Native Americans? Well, they say we're going to take their culture and we're going to destroy their area and their environment and their home and their what belongs to them. Well, no, we're going to employ these tribespeople in the plant. And we're going to take a picture of one of them in a hard hat and another one of them with a clipboard. And, they will work there. 20% of them, 40%, whatever. Just kind of, we'll integrate them into it in a kind of a way. And then we will give them these housing allotments, these kind of like estate little things, like cookie cutter things. And I mean, come on, these people used to live in huts. and we look at their infant mortality and all that previously. Well, now there's a clinic, and we have these houses are insulated. They have plumbing, and they have TV, and they have a Tesco's nearby. And sure, aren't they great? I mean, who could argue against this? And, most people, most Westerners would, it's kind of like Avatar or something. Most Westerners are completely able to facilitate in their minds that there's something above the pure material there that matters more, and a great wrong, a great evil has been done, and something has been lost, and a tyranny is at play. And in terms of these tribes people, the ones who say, I love it, I love working with my clipboard, and I love this place, and people who are against it are just, throwbacks and, all this kind of stuff, or just they need more education or something. That's your analogy. I mean, I don't see how much different it is really, right? It's different in small kind of ways, like aesthetic ways, but it's the same kind of process at play. However, it gets worse. Because in the Amazonian situation, the tribe are still getting effed over. They're still getting robbed and getting effectively genocided, or having their culture, their home, everything taken away, really. They are. But at least the corporation will, as well as giving some jobs to them and some houses and some money, a little clinic and a few trinkets and stuff like that, material stuff, as well as just doing that, they will at least also make noises about, we have great respect for the indigenous peoples here. We support the culture. We this, that, and the other. Now, in reality, it's still destructive towards the culture, no matter what they say with their CSR or their window dressing. But at least they give the nod to it. The indigenous peoples. We are on indigenous lands here. We respect the indigenous people. We celebrate the rich history and culture, and we believe these people, blah blah blah. And these people are accepted as these people. Right, these people who naturally own this land. Now, we are here, yeah, but we'll admit they own it in a kind of a way, in a kind of a birthright, a kind of a natural right. We don't get that. No. We get the opposite, which makes it worse. We get told, not only will we not respect your indigenous people, but we will, and trust me, the corporations are behind this. The corporations, man, but they are behind this. This didn't come out of nowhere. Not only will we not pay respect to it, but we will actively destroy it. And we will destroy you if you have an issue with it. If there's a word for it, a racist is what they call it, right? That's what it is. So imagine they did that with the Amazonians. They come in and fleece them and destroy them, ultimately destroy their environment, their culture, their communities. But they actually have the gall as well to say, you have an issue with that. Oof. Well, I have paid 20% of these tribesmen to buy into the Globocorp ideal, and they are now the overseers, and they were the ones with the power. They have the newspapers and the NGOs and all this kind of stuff. We call them NGOs in this forest. And so when we pay them, we empower them to be at the top of society, and we will have them destroy your life. And we'll have them take your spear away. You won't even have your spear and your, hut, right? Because you're a racist, right? It's called a racist. It's way more insidious even than the kind of Avatar vibe thing. And at least, let's say in Avatar, the like whatever they are, the get over. And it's much softer in our one, but worse as well, because they say we're not even going to take over like with weapons that way. We're just going to take over financially and buy people off, own your government, create this philosophy that says you can't exist without it, blah, 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 make you all believe it, via school education, via everything. And we won't invade you by marching, 500,000 people up and just marching them in like a conquering army. We'll just say, you're not a people. And if you say you are a racist, and you're not a people, there's no such thing. Because, there was some other type of race, a person actually historically was known to have lived here 100 years ago, or, whatever type of thing. And anyway, weren't you Norman 700 years ago as well? And blah blah blah. We've a narrative to speak against the obvious is that we are a people. They say to this this tribes people, they say, well, you conquered another people and you kind of mixed with them like hundreds of years ago. They were another tribe. So who's to say this is your land or in your place in any inherent way? Sure, if you look at past 2,000 years, it's complicated. You consisted of different tribes amalgamated, so you just don't exist. And then so they say you don't exist. So we're not even invading you with an army. We're just moving people in tribe's place. This tribal reservation, we're moving 20 people in today, 20 people in tomorrow. You're starting to basically be outnumbered. And what do you mean we're invading you? This is just diversity. This is just, these people are coming of their own accord, Okay, well, maybe we want to stop it. That's not allowed. You can't even talk about it. So it's like it's an insidious thing, but this kind of tribal Amazonian example, I view a lot of it through that lens. I know I've rambled a bit, but it's kind of like that. And every little cultural thing gets destroyed. It just is what it is, and it's just so obvious. I mean, it's just not surprising. That we live under this. And then the question is, and the short answer I have there is like, I don't know. But I think one of the good things you can do anyway is recognize the magnitude of it. And I speak about Ireland. I understand it's not limited to Ireland. It's not going to be solved. This is a bit of a divisive question, but like, it isn't just going to be solved here, right? It just, the magnitude of it is so big. You're not just going to sort it out here. Like the whole machine rages on around the world, especially in the West, unabated. Ireland somehow revolutionizes itself and ekes out its own existence within that. It's not possible. Doesn't mean, I fight it, so to speak, on an Irish basis because I'm Irish and because I love my country and my people. But I'm not going to fool myself either and think that the buck stops and starts and ends here. It doesn't. I don't know. It's going to have to be, honestly, it's going to be either we're just going to go quietly into the night as a people, as a Western people and Irish. It's either that or it's going to have to be as big and brutal. And I'm not advocating anything. I'm just predicting the flow of history as it goes on, right? India are going to go, or it doesn't mean you're starting it or plotting anything. You're just saying, I think that's the way it's going to go, something like that. I think the early 20th century was dominated by, there was an ideological revolution between communism and subsequently fascism and all of that, and liberalism, good old liberalism, and it had it out multiple times in the first half of the 20th century, hard, big time. But the magnitude of these the revolutionary forces across the world have been much bigger. So I don't know. And technology changes everything. I don't know. I would be LARPing to say that, like, here's how it's going to go. Here's the plan. Here's how I see it happening, step by step. I don't know. I'm just a guy, but it's massive. All I can say is, all I can do is kind of try to emphasize the magnitude of it, because that's surely the first step to anything. And by the way, the reason I compare it to the British Empire, let's say, among other empires, but that's the one we're obviously most familiar with historically. The reason I compare it to the British Empire is because it's very similar, in up until basically 1916, you had, it wasn't like people, like these kind of overseers running around beating everyone up. There was disenfranchisement of Irish people and Catholics and all that here and there in various ways. But, a lot of, as Padraig Pearse said, like half the people are afraid, the other half are paid, basically. And that's an important part. Half of people are afraid to be called racist or whatever. And by the way, it extends too, because I can fully predict, I believe, that with kind of the hate speech, whether legal or de facto, the kind of idea of hate speech, like you're in the newspaper because you're a heretic, you're bad, you're whatever you said is this and that, and you're a racist, far right, or whatever it is, right? There's that kind of level for people who just come straight out and go, I don't want to be demographically replaced, ethnically and culturally replaced by like a kind of a mixture of foreigners over the course of like half a century. You know what I mean? I don't want that. Seems obvious, but like they'll obviously, that's straight up the hate speech thing, right? You're being racist or whatever. Sure, you don't even exist anyway. So how could you become a minority? But there's that side of it. I totally think and that's already been accepted and is massive. It's not a big step further for people to then extend the remit of that to things that aren't actually necessarily even about race or ethnicity or culture or religion, any of that stuff. It could just be people saying, the likes of Paddy Cosgrave and the likes of Aidan Regan, these kind of people who were like, you know, pretty big insiders in their own kind of way. Like, but that kind of level of people who say, we are a tax haven, we are ran by foreign corporations, we are whatever. It's not much of a stretch for the kind of regime to go, what do you mean foreign? I mean, they're already doing it with ethnicity, religion, and culture to say, what do you mean foreign, right? What do you mean foreign as opposed to what? Irish? Sure, Ireland is just a place, you know. It's just Tato's and Barry's tea or whatever. They can just as easily do the same to if you say, oh, I pay no attention to that, you know, far right stuff, but I do think we're run by foreign companies and corporations. We're basically not a nation anymore in that strictly economic sense. They go, what do you mean foreign? And they effectively could brand you racism as well. And they might not even use the word racism, but they would apply the same energy and kind of metaphysical kind of meaning, just with a different word. You're spreading false news. You are stoking fear. You are stirring people. You're spewing. You're doing a populism, and sure, doing a populism is only one or two steps down from doing a racism. So, you know, it's not hard to kind of stretch that out a little bit and kind of marginalize and blackball people who say things like that in the very same way. It's all kind of linked. It's all the same regime. What was my point though? In similarity to the British Empire, yeah, so half of the people are afraid in that sense, even the people who are just kind of populist, even like left-wing kind of working class populists who push back on some of the stuff a little bit in certain ways, not even like me or you, but in certain ways. Those people will be blackballed, and that's the half that are made afraid, let's say. But then the more difficult and tricky part, because I think it's easy to kind of, not easy, but it's easier to kind of inspire people not to be afraid and to kind of stand up for their beliefs, right? In that sense, don't be afraid. I can give you, and not me, but, you know, I listen to other people. We all listen to each other, but like, you know, we can all speak to people and say, I can give you the words you need, the tools you need, and the moral righteousness that you deserve, because it's just true. But I can help you to become inspired in that way about yourself and about your country, and to not be afraid to explain to you, here's what they're doing to you, and here's how you can kind of deal with it and stand up against it, even though it's hard. I can do that, and you can do that more easily than going to the 50%. It might be 50%, it might be less, it might be more, but going to the other half, the ones who were effectively kind of bought off. And of course, it's, you know, you would look at it like, let's say it's 30% of people in Ireland are bought off, and then there's a smaller 20% of that 30, like there's a 20% of that 30%, so to speak, are more bought off. And then if you reduce it down to 10%, they're way more bought off and way more powerful. And then there's a 5% within that are more powerful again, which means more bought off kind of thing. And again, more powerful to implement their ideas and power. So it's kind of onion-ish as well, if you get what I mean. It's not just that 40% of people are kind of bought off and kind of bought into this regime and system, this colonial empire. It's like, well, 40% are, but like the smaller you reduce that number, the more entrenched they are, obviously. You know, you go from like the 40% person on the margins is like a civil service worker who works in a particular part of the civil service that benefits quite well from this, actually, or some, let's say, whatever, or some kind of multinational, you know, and they happen to be one of the few Irish people who has a good job in there. They're obviously going to be well bought into it. But then in the like 0.1%, you've Dennis O'Brien, you know, or whatever. You have the people who are full on billionaires who like thrive on this, and it varies depending. But to some extent, there's a certain percentage in the population who, like I say, to some extent or another, benefit from this and have a vested interest in it. But there's a huge swathe of people, obviously, then who don't. And so then there's people who economically benefit from it or have some vested interest in it, but they might also kind of have feelings of dis-ease about the cultural revolution or the cultural genocide, effectively. So it's mixed. It's not like 40% versus 60% or 50 versus 50. It swims around, but there is a portion who lean towards being dependent and benefiting from this. There's a portion who don't. Just like any colonial regime, really, you know, unless the regime is purely genocidal and just totally wipes people out left, right, and center, sparing nobody. But in general, there will be a native block as well that, you know, are in on it, basically. And it's a question of material versus things that matter more. And you see it spark out in various ways. Care more about things slightly more transcendent than just like a, you know, more Netflix, more Tesco's, more restaurants, this kind of stuff. Turning Tides. I like when people give me a little challenge. Turning Tide says, Garrod Murphy, tell me, why don't we use the term indigenous? Oh, it's not a challenge. Why don't we use the term indigenous instead of the term white? Do we have more rights under the law as indigenous people rather than white people? Well, yeah, that's obviously it. Like, as they've demonized the category that is called white people, and then that's all you are, is you're just a white person. You know, Irish doesn't exist. You're just white, and white is the lowest caste. And make no mistake, that what they're trying to tell you is that, oh, you're the highest caste, which is why you have to get on your knees, literally. No. Yeah, that's a trick, obviously. The person who has to get on their knees is the lowest caste, by obvious definition. Look up Angela Nagel's article on this recently. Just look up Angela Nagel. I don't know. I posted it in the video a few nights ago, lads. If anyone has the title or can link it in the chat, I would appreciate it. But she talked about this. It's an elite trick, basically, to tell the rest of the unwashed masses that, to gaslight you into thinking you are privileged and to make you apologize for it and to completely open yourself up and prostrate yourself. When in fact you are actually just another member. You and I are just more members of the unwashed masses who are ultimately subjugated by a regime who funneled 2.5 trillion in shadow banking plus trillions more, and that's what they really do. That's who they really work for. That's what this island zone. It's not a country. It's not a nation. It's a zone. It's a geographic zone. Western Europe island company. That's and you're living under that as an abused indigenous people. Who don't even get to be called indigenous people. And the ultimate trick is that they convince you to apologize for your privilege. And you're so busy doing that, you don't recognize what's really going on. And I know I sound like the kind of like the corporations, man, they're, you know, there's a big trick, man. But it's like, I think what I'm saying is, it sounds a bit that way, but it's I think it's logically deduced, isn't it? Tell me where I'm wrong. Like, tell me where I'm getting it wrong. And you know, it's like obvious, like if you're a corporation or an amalgamation of corporations with a administrating government in Ireland, which is Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, all that stuff, even Sinn Féin now, the Sinn Féin have cooked basically on the multinational question. They're like, no, we will not stir the pot now with the FDIs. No worries, don't worry about that. So they're gone as well. They might as well be Fine Gael Fáil. But But yeah, so they have their administrator government. Where was I going again with this? Oh yeah, is that like if I'm running that colonial regime, I mean, what's the biggest impediment? You know, there's various people. It could be a problem for you in various ways here and there. You know, you try to predict enemies and opposition, but the major opposition in an island like this, where you have like 5 million people, like 4 million of them are still indigenous, is where they start to like. What if 4 million of them get together and say, you know, again, it's like, no, we're not oppressing the people who are here, still just about minorities. No, our plan isn't to like, throw them all in vans and put in prison and, chuck them onto a plane. Some people will vigorously disagree with me in the chat, but like, it's like, in reality, that doesn't have to be at the heart of it. The point is, regardless of who's here, there's still like 4 million, still a majority of indigenous people. And if I'm this colonial regime, I go, the only real headache here that could put a stick in the spokes or create difficulties for us here is this distinct majority who have an ancestral tie here, religiously, culturally, ethnically, everything, just ancestrally. They maintain in their minds still, to some extent, they have this perception in their minds that this in some way, somehow, and I'm using air quotes here, this person would say, these indigenous people still have this lingering perception that this place, quote, belongs to them, and they go, I don't see any contract. I don't see any, we're the ones with the special economic vehicle running the 2.5 trillion. I have that signed on paper. I have legal documents. You are just some like beetle running around this island that's kind of in the way, and you drive the delivery vans and you're kind of some of the nurses and stuff. Yeah, you're kind of necessary to keep the little show on the road, but you're ultimately just on the zone, our zone, and the idea that this belongs, quote, to you is ridiculous. But, however, the problem we have is that a lot of these Irish people, regardless, still hold on to this antiquated, ridiculous view. And if they were to get too attached to it and to kind of reimagine that again, well, I mean, yeah, if you had 4 million people who were like, we own this country and you're in our country, and maybe you'll get out or you'll do what we say you do, and you're not influencing our country, our government, we're kicking out our government, we're getting a new one, basically having a revolution. This country belongs to us again. In theory, they know that 4 million people on an island could potentially do that. And it's the only thing that could really stand up to them. A divided, multicultural, absolute kind of everybody in a minority consumerist culture is gone. It's yours. Yeah, because there is no country anymore. There is no entity. The religion has been disposed of. Anything else that transcends material reality and kind of documentable kind of stuff is gone. It's all gone, and now it is just buy, consume, work, don't work, stay at home and watch Dr. Phil if you want. There'll be enough kind of dole. There's enough kind of, because of productivity and stuff like that, spare. We can kind of give you some crumbs, whatever, you can just exist here. But you've no say. We can start a popular movement to ask for to say, oh, we want transgender children or whatever. They can start that, and then, oh, lo and behold, that popular movement wins, and it's got 1 million different organizations supporting it. Oh, wow. You can do that. You can do whatever it is we give you as some kind of boutique social agenda. But if you just actually come at us, no. With the 2.5 trillion ain't going anywhere. La, 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 la. And they recognize the only impediment to all that stuff is us. So they need to get rid of us, whether it's get rid of us, which, by the way, what do you call abortion? What do you call net immigration every year? What do you call massive net immigration, net positive immigration every year? What do you call all of that? And the destruction of culture, community, family, religion, all these various fabrics of society that do drive people into depression, alienation, various things like that. I'm not saying everyone's alienated, but it is, you know, Garrod, what are you saying? You're trying to say everyone's whatever. Well, I mean, what's all this mental health stuff about? So like, where's that coming from? You know, that's trying to deal with it, supposedly. But like, you know, what do you call all of that? Abortion, emigration, net immigration, net massive immigration year on year, net massive immigration every year. What do you call that besides genocide? People bicker over that, but genocide does not have to be machetes. It doesn't. And what can you conceivably call that besides genocide? And of course, some of the skeptics and kind of cynics would come at me and go, "No, well, it's not. It's not. It's just what they'll try to tell you, which is so preposterous. It's not genocide because it's not like a plan, or there's no like individual person with a schematic for it. Well, okay, so it's just accidental. You know, in the early 2000s, the whole world started just immigrating here suddenly by magic, and all of the corporations vigorously backed it. And then 60% of the new jobs that the corporation did went to those people who came in. And all immigration ultimately comes from like the IDA, which is effectively a colonial representative of this multinational empire. It's obvious, right? It's like at some point you have to stop even arguing this stuff. It's like, it just is what it is. Can we just accept that? But yeah, so I mean, that's what it is. We are effectively a tribe in a rainforest with this global corporation rolling in big vehicles with their big clipboards, building us our little cookie cutter houses, but what's worse is they're telling us we never even existed in the first place. It is what it is. So is that a black pill I've left you with there, lads? I just wanted to, I don't know, look, part of I was trying to come up with this like figure of speech or a phrase, a quip. Is that the word for it? Quip, something like that. To play off of like no taxation without representation, and to kind of say, ultimately, there's no representation without taxation, you know, because what they're saying ultimately, and the neoliberals are kind of right, basically, is that, well, if you start taking this 14 billion from Apple, and then you start taking the 14 billion from so-and-so and so-and-so, and you just, you know, you rock in there and you just say, this 2.5 trillion thing just has to go. Get the F out of our country, do it somewhere else. Go to the Cayman Islands, we're a real country. Out you go. We start doing all that, and start putting in the same tax that like a local business gets, and realistically we should be taxing them more than anybody in Ireland gets taxed, logically. I mean, we should really. If you want to be here as a guest, then you pay extra fees, right? And logically, the neoliberals are right. Yes, if we do that, if we do anything like that, we're facing them sticks and leaving, because they can always go to like Belarus or something off the government there and have just a zone there, and it's all the same, right? So if taxation means these guys leaving, you know, then we reclaim representation, don't we? We become the leading stakeholder over our government, the biggest influencer over our government. We become a bigger influencer of our government with this trillions of influence gone, and which it would if we taxed them sufficiently. So, you know, with taxation and the consequences of it, returns our representation as a people in our own country. So by that logic, it's, you know, no representation without taxation for these multinationals. Tax them out the door and we get represented again. Do fail to do that and we don't. It's not our country. Hasn't been for a while. And that's my take on this whole Apple thing. I'm like, this is not about a little 14, you know, sugar rush we could potentially have gotten in this individual instance. It's about the entire system, top to bottom. And if you're not able to point out the ultimate premise of the whole thing as a colonial, hostile regime, extremely hostile, genocidal regime. And you can't talk about the obvious consequences of it, which are ethnic, religious, cultural, largely ethnic, looking at the replacement levels, which are just objective. If you can't talk about the whole thing holistically like that, and I'm even talking about it from a leftist point of view, economically, I'm far more of a lefty than a right winger. You know, overall, if like the Irish Times might try to call me far right, but if I was describing myself and I had to pick left or right, no in between, I'd probably have to err like left in a lot of ways. Like, not to sound like a woke centrist, I'm not a centrist, but just economically, in so many ways, I'm left wing. So, but if you can't admit the premise of it, because the whole point of them hamstringing you on your cultural, ethnic, and religious and ancestral identity, there's a reason they've hamstrung you on that, and that you become bad man if you talk about it. That's not an accident. They did that for that reason, because they know if you can't talk about that, and you're just a lefty without that, and you kind of talk about like, we just want a bigger slice of the capitalist pie that you've created. We just want a slightly bigger slice, but yes, we don't exist. Well, look, you're hamstrung. They know you can't argue against them. So that's my point, is that that's the ultimate takeaway from this 14 trillion and these this kind of story and these like PBPs and stuff like that. It's like, it's just ridiculous. The 1,000 people who were down there protesting Roderick O'Gorman, that was for a separate issue, but those people, and there's many people in Sinn Féin feel that way too, and just millions of people across the country ultimately. That organic populist class is basically, I don't know what you would call it. It's like if you have this indigenous tribe, to go back to my analogy, they're like some of the last ones that are standing there resisting the tanks, resisting the bulldozers, firing arrows at it, metaphorically speaking. I don't know. That makes it sound like it's doomed. I don't think it is. But that's where it's at. There's no institution. There's no nothing. It's us, effectively. And I'm not bigging myself up. I'm just talking about everyone. That organic movement, which is, at this point, it's clearly becoming, it's not some kind of dyed-in-the-wool right-winger, overly kind of like conservative or any of that stuff. You know, anyone who was there on last Saturday could tell, you know, that crowd wasn't invested in some kind of niche political paradigm or dichotomy. It's just populism. It's the thing they're so afraid of, which, again, why is populism called bad? You work it out, you know. But yeah, that's what's left. And I just hope it grows. But there's such an understanding we have to do on this regime, and there's so much thinking to be done, because ultimately people talking about communism and fascism and liberalism and all this is new. You can draw from all of those ideologies. They are rich traditions in and of themselves, in their own ways. But this is new. It requires supplementary thinking, and a lot of it, and a lot of bravery and everything else as well. But I don't want to get too dramatic. You know what? This is just a stream, one stream during the week. You know, this is not my final testament or anything. But yeah, look, I don't know. Have a nice evening or midnight. It's gone midnight. Have a nice sleep. I'll be back tomorrow night to talk about something else. That's Apple. That's the tax. That's our 14 billion. That's our situation, etc. Thanks everybody for watching. I'd appreciate it if you subscribe as well if you haven't already. It's just there pretty nearby, down towards the left somewhere. So yeah, appreciate your time. Take it easy. Ihawa. Sleep well. See ya.